Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. President Biden is getting ready to give his State of the Union speech tonight. I'm not sure how many listeners who are not being paid to watch as we are will be tuning in. But Kim, what do you make of this political moment? I mean, I guess we should not expect the era of big government is over. That was the famous Bill Clinton line from his 1996 State of the Union address. But President Biden has already made clear that his view of the 2022 elections, where Republicans took the House, but with fewer gains than had been expected, and Democrats picked up seats in the Senate. His takeaway was that President Biden does not need to make any real U-turns here.
That's what he said in his own words. He said, look, the results of the election says that I don't need to make any changes. So there will be no pivot. But here's a problem for the White House is that he can describe the elections that way all he wants. But the reality is that Americans out there did want some change. They're very frustrated by the economy, by the border, by foreign policy, by crime, by things that are going on in education. And the president's approval ratings have been underwater for quite some time now. And so the White House knows it has a political problem, especially if the president is indeed going to relaunch a presidential campaign in the coming weeks, which more and more people are talking about. So I would expect this moment. He's going to go up there. You're going to hear a lot about supposedly how fabulous the economy is. He's going to brag that he created 12 million jobs. He's going to ignore the fact that a lot of this was simply the economy bounding back from an extraordinary moment of COVID when people were locked down. He's going to brag about progress over COVID-19 and the fact that they are getting ready to end the official emergency. They'll take that as a milestone and take that win. He's going to brag that the United States is leading a coalition successfully to help Ukraine and push back Putin. Probably you'll hear something too trying to cast the balloon shooting as the administration's win in its confrontation against China. You're going to hear a lot of things that aren't necessarily going to gel with reality, but this is going to be the White House attempt to, as you hear a lot of the press put it, turn it around and convince the American people that things really are a lot better than they feel they are.
One thing I'll be watching for, though, is any agenda that President Biden wants to put forward for a divided Congress. State of the Union addresses are often derided as laundry lists, but here now we have two houses of Congress who have different ideas about how to do the laundry. So I expect President Biden to try to make political hay, as every president in the State of the Union does. But I will be watching to see whether he is only pitching proposals that are in the Democratic dream category, or whether he is hedging any of those as proposals that could actually pass. And I'll pick a couple. One is permitting reform. Senator Joe Manchin, a member of Joe Biden's party, has been promised last year some sort of vote on permitting reform. President Biden sometimes suggests that he wants to go in that direction, make things easier to build. And those things, by the way, could include wind farms and solar farms, offshore wind farms. Those things get tied up in the same sort of red tape as natural gas pipelines and roads and bridges. Another one would be something on immigration. And I don't think that that requires, Monet, Biden to make any substantial pivot. It just requires him to frame the issue in a way where he's saying, this is what we can get done together, and here's the compromise that I propose. And we'll give Republicans this, and Democrats will take this, and we'll get some legislation done. I don't know what the odds of that are, Monet. Boy, it sure would be nice to have a State of the Union address where there's actually some legislation that might be able to pass that gets discussed.
Yeah, I may regret saying this, but at the moment, I'll have to say that I do think immigration would be the one major area where it's possible that Biden might say something constructive and open the floor for bipartisan process that would lead to some improvement in border security. What I would expect is that Biden will say this is an urgent issue, that we understand the burden on some of these border states, and that we would like to get something done. But the problem is that it's very unlikely that he'll be specific about it. So he'll basically be shifting the blame onto Congress, saying, I'd like to see something passed. I'd like to see some reform, but certainly won't be leading the way and actually taking the political cost by attaching himself to any particular position. It will just be left open ended to Congress. And even that, I think, is an optimistic scenario. It's quite likely that he won't mention anything about the border in the speech at all. But beyond that, I think it's very unlikely that he'll mention any policy specifics that are likely to pass a Republican House. Some of the items that leaked in advance of the speech were an increase in the tax on stock buybacks and a cap on the price of insulin, both of which are agenda items that the Democrats tried to pass in the previous Congress and were unable to secure support, even within their own party, for the positions that Biden is sticking out now. So the idea that Republicans are going to join any of those is unlikely. And I very much think that he believes he was successful pushing a very progressive agenda when Democrats controlled Congress in the first half of his term. And he probably doesn't understand the degree to which things like subsidies for green industries and even the infrastructure bill are not as popular with Americans broadly as they are among his own base. But he has showed in his presidency thus far that he basically is interested in playing to his base. And I don't think that there's much likelihood that he's going to use the State of the Union to pivot from that.
Kim, we'll give you the last word here, but my other thought is whether this is an opportunity for Biden to make a case to Congress and the country that the support for Ukraine and its defense of its sovereign territory is worth doing on the merits as a matter of U.S. national interests. I mean, I think that President Biden deserves credit for the material that the U.S. has shipped to help Ukrainian fighters so far, even if it has been later than it could have been. And we're still arguing over some things like F 16 fighters. But it does seem like there is, at least in some corners of Congress, waning interest in that project. And as we go into the second year of this war between Ukraine and Russia, is it up to Biden to make a case here that it's in the U.S. national interest?
It would be great if he did, although I've been waiting for a year for him to do so, so I'm not necessarily holding my breath. The president's rhetoric on this up until now has been good in that he has continued to express support for Ukraine, but he always does it in the language of the United States is leading this or working with this coalition to stop the bad guy, Putin. And it's about Ukraine and it's about Russia. And it needs to be about us. It needs to be as well. It also needs to be about us. It also needs to be about Ukraine. But it needs to be talking about the importance of making sure that Ukraine is victorious for US interests for like reasons to begin with that China is watching this. It is taking the measure of this. It wants to know if the United States is going to stay strong. It would be great if he also decided to explain to the United States that the United States needs to take certain actions to make sure that it's better positioned against Russia in the future. For instance, dealing with our energy problem at the moment and unleashing American energy supplies. It would just be great if he'd simply acknowledge the United States needs a new focus on this if it's going to maintain its position as leader of the free world and maintain peace and stability around the globe. We can't just sit back and let other people engage in these fights and hope none of it intrudes on US shores. Our enemies and adversaries certainly are looking for our weaknesses. So it would be great if we used that moment, Kyle, but let's just say I'm not holding my breath.
Thank you, Kim and Monet. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.